Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here. We are going to have a roundtable about trustworthiness of digital services. And one of the panelists, Professor Antonio Martini, who's a professor, Martino, a professor emeritus at the University of Salvador, Buenos Aires, for personal reasons will not be able to join. So I will take advantage of this, of the fact that Professor Martino is not going to come, to give a brief introduction to this debate, and then I will call the panelists to join and discuss specific points, angles of view on the issue. The issue that we are going to debate now is, I would say, it's based on a concept that was somehow introduced by the Director General of DG CNECT, Roberto Viola, and by Professor Sachs when they spoke about the trustworthiness. Somehow, when we use digital instruments, digital tools, we focus very much on the applications, and now we are discussing about possible measures in order to increase the trustworthiness of AI systems. But is this enough? We have been waked up to the fact that, we always heard about profiled, personalized advertising, and until the book on surveillance capitalism, we didn't realize very much that the other face of the coin of personalized advertising is the surveillance of people, of citizens. But what happens when we use digital services from states, from public administrations? What is the second phase of this? What is the second phase of this coin? There is one big difference between private companies and states, and the fact is that states have the legal monopoly of force. So we need to have a particular attention on the second phase of this coin. So we get digital services, participation, and all these good things, but then we need to take care of the other phase of the coin. It's not only a matter of concentration of data. It's not just a matter of publication or disclosure of algorithms. The fact is that more and more algorithmic systems and AI, so statistical systems, take decisions on our lives. And we need to be absolutely clear that these systems are used in a correct way. We need to trust these systems. And the fact that an algorithm is published, as a software is published, I argue that it does not provide the necessary level of guarantees of trustworthiness, because we really don't know if the software that is being executed in a specific moment by a public administration service is the one that is published on GitHub, let's say. And we don't really know if the data on which the decision is based is really and effectively the correct data in that specific moment, and it has not been mangled and then recorrected. So it's not only an issue of transparency, it's not only an issue of surveillance, there is also a basic underlying issue of trustworthiness. Let me tell you about, very briefly, three, four points that spur this reflection after the first edition of the International Forum on Digital and Democracy. The first one is in Italy. We had the police who is running a mugshot database that has been digitized. This mugshot database included the picture of 50,000 people, because of course, when it was managed by humans, we had an issue of scale and speed of accessing these mugshots. So it was limited to 50,000. This was digitized, and the first tender was increased to 100,000 mugshots of 100,000 people. And then the system got expanded and expanded again. And it took, if I'm not wrong, 3 or 4 parliamentary inquiries with different governments to learn that the system had grown up to 10 million people, the pictures of 10 million, nearly 10 million people in this mugshot database. And you see, the fact is that we as citizens don't have a very effective system in order to be able to look into what a public administration really does and if it is perfectly compliant with the system. We need to trust the system. But how do we know if that system is opaque, and how do we know if it's managed properly? We tend to trust public administration, but public administration is, the executive power is composed of even millions of people in certain states. And in millions of people, of course, there is going to be some person that is not behaving correctly. And so there is an underlying issue that we don't have a security perimeter just for the users outside of the public administration, but we have a security perimeter also for users inside of the public administrations who need to be trusted and trustworthy. And the fact is that these systems take decisions on our lives that can condition our lives. A personal fact, my younger daughter, a teenager, she was vaccinated for COVID very early in the vaccine process, and there was an issue about the synchronization of databases and the data between national and regional level. And when the COVID pass became a requirement to access bars and restaurants, she was not allowed to enter the restaurant because an issue of the data. And so we need to trust the system to manage the data the correct way and the software to behave in a correct way. But this is not always the case. In Spain, a case has emerged of energy subsidies for families in need, and some families were rejected their requests for energy subsidies, and they went to a consumer association, and this consumer association requested the ministry to access the algorithm, to access the code, to learn if the code was implemented correctly, and they refused to provide the source code, and the court agreed with the refusal based on copyright issues. And of course, this copyright motivation does not stand with European law. So the CDO, this consumer association, appealed to a higher level court, and also in the high level court, the request to access the algorithm of the software providing the subsidies, so taking the decision of the life of the people, the request to access has been denied on national security grounds. So it makes me somehow smile how energy subsidies to families in need might be a national security issue, but this has happened. Recently, there was a report by EPIC, the privacy organization in Washington, that disclosed how Washington, D.C. collects and mixes all sorts of data from private and public provider, even car plates readers, and they feed this data into automated decision system. My point here is, and the point that we would like to discuss in this roundtable, is how can we improve the level of trustworthiness not only of the applications, but of the systems and the people who manage the system. Because I argue that a state that is trustworthy should not require citizens to trust it. It should be verifiable and transparent and verifiable. Transparency is not enough. We need to trust the system. So this is the topic of this panel, and I will now call the panelists. I will first introduce Gry Hasselbalch. She is the co-founder and research director of DataEthics.eu, and she is an expert on data ethics and artificial intelligence, so with respect to trustworthiness in data. Then I would like to call to the panel Nena Dokuzov. Nena is the head of the project group on the new economy and blockchain for the government of Slovenia, and of course blockchain and somehow cryptography in order to be sure of the data that you are managing can be an important ingredient dealing with this type of problems. And last but not least, I welcome Vicente Andreu Navarro, who's policy officer at DG CNECT, and DG CNECT has been previously mentioned, briefly mentioned by Roberto Viola, has built a very important trust infrastructure in Europe for the relationships between companies, public administrations, and citizens. The EIDAS regulation dealing with digital identity and trust services. And so the topic would be how these trust services can expand in order to embrace digital systems, in order to make sure that these systems are trustworthy. So thank you very much for joining us today. We have about 30 minutes before 30 minutes left before the next topic. So I would like to reserve you about 7-8 minutes for each of you, and then we have some space for Q&A, and then we will hand over to the next session. So thank you very much for joining us, and please agree if you can tell us your point of view on this issue. Agree? Something happening. I hope that Agree comes up. Okay, she was muted. Now it's Gree's turn.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Stefano, for inviting me for this this very interesting panel with a very important topic. I mean, I remember now listening to when you were speaking, I remember kind of the first times when I heard the word trust in connection with digital services. And some of you might also remember that this was the time around when we had the Snowden revelations of this big mass surveillance program with, as you talked about before, the public-private kind of partnership, the kind of black box partnership in some way, we could call it that, with, revealing a kind of mass structure of kind of control and surveillance of the data that we've been sharing kind of blindly throughout the years through this kind of data infrastructure that we've been building up and had gotten used to, and this was in 2013. And the first reaction after that, I remember, was several governments, and in particular saying that now we should rebuild trust in digital services. And being part at that time, I have a different role now, but at that time being part of very much the civil society and the digital rights community, one of the first things we were saying was, no, we don't need to rebuild trust. Actually, it's healthy to have distrust in technologies, because this is the way we can critically address some of the problems, some of the development that had been, in a way, been running out of control, a development that had been were driven by specific interests that were very invisible. And these interests and this entire network of powers and power dynamics behind these data infrastructures was something that suddenly became very visible to us. So the first demand, I think, that came from very much from civil society organizations at that point was, before we start rebuilding trust, we actually have to rebuild an entire infrastructure of digital services. And so a lot of things has happened since then. I met Stefano in the EU's AI high-level group, where we developed the ethics guidelines for AI in Europe, and we also came up with certain recommendations and with certain requirements in terms of what is trustworthy AI. And actually, I have to say that it at first had a different name, or the title of what our work, it was called Trusted AI. But we were some that were kind of concerned with this title and said, okay, no, we don't need just trusted AI. We need something that proves itself to the humans that are involved in this process that it's trustworthy. Now, getting to the point of course, that the focus at that point has been very much the design of the technology and the systems, and Stefano was also referring to that before, how do you then, you can build a system that you so and so much in the very design and the systems development that there's some trustworthy features, but in the end, when it comes to it, trust is a human aspect, and trust is the kind of the human involvement of this kind of technological human interaction. So of course, a lot of it also happened since we created these requirements that had certain requirements to when you build a system. And today I would say and also emphasize that, of course, we've come to a point now when we talk about implementing trustworthy systems, that this is very much also about implementing them in accountable organizational structures, for example, and implementing them in context of institutions that can support the trustworthiness and make sure that we actually have access and insights into how these systems are built. So that is the next step. I would say this is an evolution of building up a system of trust and ecology. Now, lately, these few days, we talked about an ecology, a media ecology, and maybe it's just a kind of basic ecology of trust. And this has several components. It has a legal structure. It has a design structure. It has a standard setting structure. It has even also a component of education and literacy in terms of how we use these systems. So trust is basically something, of course, it is the human component of a technology and a socio-technical infrastructure, but it's very much a composite of many different aspects that we need to ensure. Without one of them, a trustworthy system will fail. And that's, for now, my initial statement.
Thank you very much, Green. And I would like to welcome Nena Dokuzov, as I said, the head of the project group for New Economy and Blockchain from the government of Slovenia. And I would ask to Nena, the idea, I mean, we were looking to trustworthiness of AI systems, but we are looking to the applications. And of course, we take the assumption, the implicit assumption that the underlying level, the underlying infrastructure, the data, and the software that is running in a specific moment are really those that are intended to be. And of course, we need verifiable computing in order to be able to verify that what is running is really corresponding to a specific source code. And then if you manage a system, then you have the possibility of mangling the data without anyone perceiving it, noting that the data is tampered with, and you can do with that with a precision at a scale, at a speed that can have significant impact even on society. So my question for Nena is, how do you think that blockchain technologies could fit into the picture in order to be able to provide trustworthiness to the system and to the fact that the data is really what it should be, and the logs of the systems are really what they should be, and they have not been tampered with?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that first, when I started to study blockchain technology as such, I read one article which was very beneficial, and on this base also the European study for blockchain, the first study was based. It defined that social value proposition for blockchain. And one of them, it has 5 elements at least. The first element is authentication and authorization, so self-sovereign identity and sovereignty. The second one is traceability. The third one is democracy. The fourth one is interoperability. The fifth one is trust. Okay, and it really was a driver for me to start to learn about this technology. This was 5 years ago, probably. And now we came to maybe very transparent and very positive acknowledgements on what brings that technology. We know that if blockchain enables the recording and tracing the data from the original on, and enables validating of the data in each node through consensus system. It brings a lot of trust and also the confidence. Last time at the conference in the OECD, we had a discussion what is the difference between the trust and the confidence. We can describe the trust or add the trust as the attribute of the node to verify the credential, okay? The confidence we can have in the technology. So if we combine blockchain technology with AI, with other technologies, we can increase the trust in all spectrum of technologies that converge together. How to put the data? The huge discussion in Europe was GDPR and what amount of the data to put on blockchain, for example. We decided under EBSI not to put the data on chain, which is not allowed by the regulation or which is not permitted by a specific human being. New eIDAS regulation will define probably better how we deal with the data, with personal data. But what is very important here for the trust is also that blockchain gives you a possibility to own the data. Even if we go to Web3, to NFT, to Metaverse, we are in the situation that we can own the data, we can share the data, and we can manipulate with our own ownership of the data, which is very important for the future developments. So the trust, if I can put my data on the chain or off the chain, but on blockchain infrastructure and also in applications, here, without the trust, I cannot, even if it is, we know from the crypto that public and permissioned blockchains, but we are talking here about permissioned blockchains in which data can have its own value and trust can be valued through the data. Maybe this for the beginning. I don't hear you, Stefano.
I was muted, sorry, I muted myself, thank you. Thank you, Nena. And then last but not least, I welcome Vicente de Navarro, an experienced security management and data protection specialist who has worked a lot in the public sector and has skills in certification, securities, process certification, securities, data protection, regulation. I mean, really what we are discussing about. So we would very much like to learn your point of view on these issues, Vicente. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here today. I'm going to talk from the perspective of the regulatory side of the trust and the trust in government services. I'm going to talk about the eIDAS regulation. As you may know, the European Union is currently revising its digital identity framework, and right now, with the Council and the Parliament, both the new regulatory framework and the technical implementation are under discussion. The current legal framework is an ecosystem that is not so old, but it was built around the eIDAS regulation that entered into force in 2014, and given the pace that things evolve in the digital world, that seems a lot of time. The current eIDAS regulation is based on two main concepts, basically electronic identities and trust services. Both of them are fundamental for building trust in government services. Electronic identification is the process of using data in an electronic format that uniquely represent a person. That could be a natural person, a legal person, or a natural person acting in representation of a legal person. Trust services, on the other hand, are electronic services based on the creation, verification, and validation of electronic signatures. And of course, electronic seals, electronic timestamps. Services offered by trust service providers are, for instance, electronic delivery services, website authentication services, preservation of electronic signatures, and these kind of things. Both of them, both electronic identities and trust services, are important for building trust in government services because they provide, basically, they provide a secure electronic interaction framework between citizens, business, and public authorities. The eIDAS regulation in force has shown some shortcomings that the EU, the European Union, is trying to solve in the amendment that is now under preparation. One of the main objectives of this amendment is to make the use of electronic identities possible for all European citizens. Currently, a rough estimation of the data we have shows that only 2/3 of European citizens have access to electronic identification schemes. This objective of making it accessible for every and all European citizens is going to be achieved, or we intended that it is achieved by establishing the obligation for member states to implement and notify to the Commission electronic identification schemes. What was voluntary or optional till now will become an obligation, so that all member states will have to provide these tools for their citizens. But also, generalization on the use of electronic identities in the Union will only be possible if we provide the citizens with means for using these electronic identities in a simple way. That's why the new regulation proposed considers to implement a user-controlled digital identity in the form of a personal wallet. That's, in summary, an app in the smartphone that will allow the storage and use of identity data and diverse other attributes or credentials. This wallet will be under the sole control of the user and will provide a secure means of identification in online services with a high level of assurance on the identity of the user and the possibility of performing qualified electronic signatures that grant, as you know, these qualified electronic signatures provide or grant the same legal effects that handwritten signatures. In the design of this wallet, security and respect to privacy are fundamental concerns. It will be issued at the highest level of security possible and will prevent, for instance, tracking of data which are not necessary for the provision of the services. Alignment with the Cybersecurity Act and with the General Data Protection Regulation is a main objective of the proposal. But also, together with the wallet, the new text also includes some mechanisms for strengthening user rights and reducing the possibilities of fraud. The use of qualified website authentication certificates is reinforced if the proposal goes forward. That will be used to authenticate websites and to link those websites to natural or legal person. I guarantee that is not common nowadays. And so the Commission hopes that this new regulatory framework will reinforce the trust in government online services, but not only of them, because the wallet will offer also to the private sector secure and trusted identification in use cases where a strong authentication is required. And also the private sector will be able to issue attestation of attributes to the wallet following the rules established in the regulation. So the involvement of the private sector, not only of e-government, is an objective to be achieved by the new regulation. And that's all from my side for this initial statement.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vicente. Thank you very much. So the sun is setting here. I had to move a little bit because the sun is shines on my face. Thank you very much for your comments. Now, there are a couple of questions that revolved, and I will try to summarize them, so to give you 2 or 3 minutes to come each, so you feel free to answer to this question. The revolving around the issue of concentration versus fragmentation, meaning given that we have seen the prominence of digital companies becoming oligopolists, monopolists, huge companies, huge conglomerates, and the fact that this leads to somehow some, critic aspects with respect to concentration of data. What do you envision as the most trustworthy architecture for a state systems, for state systems? Concentrated systems or more fragmented systems? And what would be the role of private companies in this concentration or fragmentation / federation? So I would do the opposite round now, starting again from Vicente, moving then on to Nena, and finally to Gree. We have 10 minutes to go. Thank you if you can keep your reply in 3 minutes. Thank you. Vicente.
Okay, from my point of view, it's not a matter of concentration or diversification, but it's a matter of following the principles that are already in the regulation. System must be transparent, and the use of data must follow the principles of lawfulness, minimization, and must be the minimum set of data must be used in each case. So the aim must be to avoid the tracking of personal data that now have become common for large corporations, for big companies that could elaborate a profile of each one of us just because we have an email account or just because we use a mobile telephone that needs to be linked to an account, or just because we are not careful enough when we provide data to some platforms. So I don't see a big impact or a big difference in the impact between choosing a decentralized or a diversified environment or a centralized one.
Thank you very much. Nena, 3 minutes.
Yeah. Actually, I just came from Gaia X Government Advisory Board, and a very similar discussion is here, what we had there, concentration and the federation. I think that if we combine the technologies, for example, data-based infrastructures and services with that lean on data, that are quite secure at the edge, then we can advocate for the data federation, because it brings not only that sovereignty on the place where the data owner is, but also it brings the information near to the source. So access to information in the real time. We are building that interoperable structures and infrastructures, not to have the centralized ones. Maybe I think from the perspective of blockchain, but blockchain enables that distributed concept. that we function with the use of nodes. If we function with the use of nodes, we can be interconnected with anybody elsewhere in Europe, for example, through EPSI. I know that Vicente is an advocate for EU wallet without blockchain, but I think that if we add the technology that enables that decentralization, that federation, that distribution and access to data at the point where the need is, that it can bring either more better sustainability, better usage of data, more efficient usage of data, and also it more better control over the own data that we provide on the platforms. What I have here is maybe that the legislation on the European level is still designed with the certain level of centralization, okay? But I think that we cannot afford this anymore. And we really need that federation of data. For example, I'm also the national coordinator for IPSE, for common project of common European interest for data infrastructure and services. This is Eurocloud. It is based on the federation system. We have data spaces that need to be interconnected, but federated, because we are covering under these data spaces a lot of the territories and a lot of different types of data. There is one more thing. I like very much that European Digital Act, because it describes also that the data which is accessible everywhere can create even bigger value. OECD found out that the right usage of data can save 40% of the costs of the company, because we are communicating the data on the products, and they use the term connected products and related services. And we still haven't used the potential of that data that we are taking out of connected products and related services. Every product which is connected to the main product, and every service that we can access to it where we are on the spot, every such item can provide us the value from the ownership and the value of the data that we can use and reuse as much as we want to do. So it is all very connected, and it is, I think that in one point of the time, we will come to a totally decentralized and distributed system with access. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Nena. Thank you, Nena. It's very interesting to discuss about technology and the implications for the defense of democracy. We need to think about these things in the good times, because when it comes to the hard times, then it's when you need these defenses. And so I finally, the last 3 minutes, Dri, we would like to hear your point of view of this issue, centralized or decentralized.
Okay, thank you, Stefano. So, I mean, what I usually talk about is social techno data infrastructures of power. And if we think about these data infrastructures as forms of ways of distributing power, then I think there's always an issue with an infrastructure that somehow enables the concentration of power. And so of course, I mean, to answer your question, of course, I would always kind of consider an infrastructure that somewhat distributes power evenly and equally, and in a way that that corresponds with kind of the democratic principles that, in particular, also in Europe, is built on. And what in this connection, kind of the most positive movement that I've been following, and this is actually a movement that I've seen mostly taking point of departure in Europe, is what has been called, it has many names, but it's the personal data store, the My Data, the data trust movement, where you in some way create these services that can turn over this more centralized control of data in the current data infrastructures that we have right now. And in that connection, of course, the Data Governance Act, when the ideas of creating alternative data intermediaries from what we have now, even the term data altruism, even though that can also be quite controversial, but the idea that you actually distribute the power more evenly between different actors through the infrastructure and through the data infrastructures that we're creating right now, I think that will even help. Now we talk about black boxes, and we're talking about people that are starting to distrust digital services, basically because they don't know. They give their data, but they don't know to who or how it's used or whatever. I think this kind of decentralized data infrastructure based on these kind of personal data stores, PIMs, that's what it's called, also personal information management systems, or data trust legal structures. These will help actually rebuild trust, because they will help people to empower them to choose themselves how they will share the data and contribute to this data infrastructure. So I think that's a very important movement, and the legal structure that is being developed right now, the Data Governance Act, is only an element out of it. Also the implementation of GDPR, which we'll still see in the aftermath of, is also really important in this framework. So there's several aspects of this. There's the legal part, but there's also the technological part, where I see, in particular, as I've said, I've seen so many engineers, so many even academic initiatives that are trying to create data cooperatives and things like this is really, really important. So of course, to answer your question, any data infrastructure that somehow concentrates power is always problematic in a democracy.
Thank you very much, Gry. Thank you very much, all of you, for this very interesting debate.